Hello, Paso. Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, and I'm a philosopher here at EPCC.
My name is Jules Simon, and I'm a philosopher at the University of Texas, El Paso.
And today we are honored to have Mr. Miguel Valenzuela as our guest. He actually introduced me to show business, so that's actually extra special.
And it was a pleasure.
So Mr. Valenzuela has been teaching at the college level for 2 decades. He has taught at many colleges and universities. He's currently an adjunct professor at EPCC, where he has taught painting, drawing, design, and his favorite and most fulfilling class, art appreciation. Many doors have opened for him at EPCC. One of them is the opportunity to host a television program titled Creative Thinkers, where he interviews people from all branches of society. He explores the connection between creativity and everything. He is currently working on writing his first book, which will focus on the importance of art and creativity in our world. Miguel's focus right now is to do as much as he can to bring awareness to the importance of art and how it helps us all in so many ways. There is always something new on the horizon. Miguel, thank you so much for joining us.
The pleasure is mine. I'm super excited to talk to you guys.
Oh, I am too. Let's get right to it.
Sure, absolutely.
Start with number one. Our first question: what is beauty, and how can we define beauty? Or
can beauty be defined?
Can beauty be defined? Yeah.
Well, I think it can be defined to a certain degree. But for the most part, I think it's a very, very broad subject. We really can't limit something that's limitless, right? We can associate some sort of definition to it, but we really can't define it per se. For example, and I'll give you guys some very good examples, one can say this painting is beautiful, right? And we're looking at the aesthetic elements of this thing, that work of art, but we're not really understanding all of the context behind this particular work of art, and there is beauty within that. And what I mean by that is, if I look at a perfect sphere, for example, I can appreciate the beauty and the color of it because it's perfect, right? But we don't understand what's behind that thing, and that thing could be the idea and concept of who the creator was, why he created it, how he did it. Another example that I can give you guys is, we can, I guess, contrast the beauty behind something that is beautiful, like a flower, against the beauty of somebody being kind to somebody else, somebody having empathy towards somebody else. I don't know how many times I've said, wow, how beautiful that is that that father is helping out his daughter, for example. That's something that we don't generally associate to beauty. We may use the word, but we don't really understand what we're saying. So there are a lot of kind of limitless possibilities to what this thing called beauty is. But in essence, beauty, for the layman, I guess, would be understanding a perfect thing, because that's really what we think beauty is. If it's perfect, then it's beautiful. But if it's imperfect, then it's not beautiful. And I believe that that is not the way that we should look at this thing called beauty. There's so much more to it. So it's very interesting, because as you guys, as philosophers, you guys are always seeking wisdom, right? We were talking about that before.
Presumably.
Yeah, we were talking about that before, and I think that that's what we're here for, is to introduce some sort of wisdom or some sort of answers to the individuals who are watching the show right now. And, you know, I think through the concepts of what will come out, I think that people will have a better understanding of what beauty is.
I have a follow-up.
I do too.
Okay. Do you think something ugly can be beautiful?
100%. Because, and this is the thing, I think that a lot of people think, because we've been taught to think this, right? We're not individuals who are, because we have free will, use our free will to the best of our ability. We think we use our free will, but in reality, there are a lot of people who are just kind of following the status quo. And because of that, we limit ourselves. So when we think what is beautiful, we associate it to what we've learned about beauty, right? So if I go out and read a magazine, and the magazine tells me that this woman who has these perfect dimensions, or this man who has a perfectly built body with a six-pack is beautiful, then that's what I look for. But that's not what beauty is. So I can think that something that is absolutely imperfect can also be beautiful, but that's where we lack, I think. Because of our lack of understanding, we don't ever go to that one place. One example that I give in my class is the concept of this artist named Jean-Michel Basquiat. And Jean-Michel Basquiat was an individual who was creating artwork back in the mid-'80s, early to mid-'80s. And his works of art were non-traditional in many ways. And what I mean by traditional as opposed to non-traditional is traditional artwork, when we think about art, is something by the 4 Ninja Turtles is what I use in my class. I always tell the students, you know, the 4 Ninja Turtles, Raphael, Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Donatello. And they're like, oh yeah, those guys, oh, they come from this art world. I'm like, absolutely. But they did artwork, they created artwork during the Renaissance time. And in the Renaissance time, what we were doing is creating, what we were thinking about was mimicking what we saw. So if I saw a person, I would paint something that looks like that person, right? And I try to do it to the best of my ability. But Basquiat, in his more contemporary works, he does not do that. He goes against the grain to create something that is absolutely not realistic looking. And for me, that is beautiful. Why? Because beauty to me is not what is beautiful. Beauty to me is this gamut of so many other things. It's just so broad for me. So when I see something different, to me, that is beautiful. If you're really trying to expand your mind and create something different, to me, that's beautiful. I cannot, you know, within my right mind say, beauty is only that thing that I saw coming from the Renaissance. It cannot be that. That would mean that all of the beauty has already been made. All of the beauty has already been done. And what then do we have to look forward to?
My follow-up, I was listening to your response there, Miguel, and my follow-up is a little bit different. So I just taught a course on aesthetics, so my follow-up's connected to the next question as well. Right. What is aesthetics, right? I begin the course by studying Kant and Kant's ideas about beauty. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher from the 18th century. And one of the things he says about beauty, well, it's twofold. Right. And you mentioned both of them, right? And earlier on in your response. One was when we're exposed to the appearance of a flower or some other object in nature, and we say to each other, we say to another person, isn't that beautiful? Correct. And it's almost like a natural response. Well, we expect the other one to agree with us. So the judgment about what's beautiful is something that we make when we want people to agree with us. We want people to say and agree with us, oh, that's beautiful, right? As opposed to different or ugly, right? And so beauty turns out, our experiences of beauty turn out to be these ways that we can identify with other people about what pleases us in terms of the beauty of the way the petals on a flower are just arranged in just such right away. Right, and that kind of thing. There's that element of beauty, what pleases us aesthetically, sensually, right? Emotionally as well. It triggers chemicals in our mind to just say, oh, this is really pleasing. It makes me feel good by viewing it or experiencing it and things like that, right? And so then the other part of, you know, that you mentioned, like a beautiful person or a beautiful experience, the relationship of sociality with beauty. Beauty in some ways helps us to understand the harmony of our relationships. So there's a kind of an ethics related to it, right? So if we want to have experiences with people that are not only good but beautiful, we'll want those experiences to continue. So we want to cultivate beauty because we want to come back to those experiences. The experience. This is so we surround ourselves with beautiful things, right? So it's a beautiful thing to have this conversation with you, to have this dialogue, right? And so if you think it's beautiful too, then maybe you'll come back and we'll have another conversation. And we'll continue on and on. Right? And so there's that kind of ethical level too. So there's one where what's beautiful is what we can agree on,
right?
Right? That it's pleasing to us, right? And the other one is what's beautiful is something we want to come back to, and it's going to help our relationships to, you know, carry on in the future.
And my opinion is that there is kind of this grouping of tangible things, right?
Yeah.
It is tangible for me to see a flower and have it there and appreciate its beauty, right? And then there is this intangible idea of what this conversation is, right? And both of those things can be beautiful. In the same respect, there could be viewers that are watching this show that will say, well, I don't agree with that. That wasn't a beautiful conversation, right? And they would be perfectly fine in displaying that or giving us their opinion on that. But that doesn't disprove the fact that for us, it was beautiful. And for me, one of the most important things is the fact that if we do indeed have a better understanding of what is beautiful, then we can see everything is beautiful. But if we don't have that deeper understanding of what is beautiful, and again, beauty is such a broad subject. I'm not saying beauty as in the flower. I'm saying beauty as in all things that surround us. Then that other individual who didn't think that it was beautiful can also at least begin to appreciate what the conversation was about. And that's why I love the teaching art appreciation, because I don't feel like it is a subject that is kind of a secondary subject. For me, art is everything. Just like for me, math is everything. Just like for me, science is everything. Just like for me, philosophy is everything. Because we have to understand that there is this kind of base where everything grows from. It's like the ground is all of these things. And if we don't fully comprehend what the ground is, then how are we ever going to root ourselves solidly within this thing, right, that exists? So yeah, for me, both of those things can be important. And I don't think that having one mindset or another is correct or one mindset or another is incorrect. I think that's the beauty in it, which goes back to our initial question. What is beauty? It's so broad, it's, you know, it's limitless, really, if we think about it.
I want to give an example. In my classes, when we talk about language and how language, it's real interesting, right? Because there's rules of grammar.
Correct.
And syntax, right?
Correct.
Just as there are rules in art that define what is allowed and what isn't. But language, like art, continues to grow and develop.
Absolutely.
And it's real interesting because we have grammar Nazis, right, that will correct us.
Yes.
Sometimes I turn into one.
I had a good day. No, your day was well, or whatever, right?
Right. How are you doing? Good. No, you don't say good. You say well, right?
Yeah, correct.
Etc. So we have grammar Nazis, but language is continuously evolving, especially here in La Frontera. And I'm speaking Spanglish, right?
Sí.
And so one of the examples.
I answer in Spanish, of course.
Right? And so one of the examples I give to my students is how bad has so many meanings, including good.
Correct.
Like, wow, your shoes are so bad, actually mean they're awesome, thumbs up, not what it literally means, right? So what you were saying about something that's ugly can also be beautiful, it's, to me, I thought of the word something bad is actually good.
And that's a great analogy, because it really is within our interpretation. And that's one of the things that I think is most beautiful about what beauty is that we are the ones who interpret what that is. And one of the best examples that I give my students in my class is I tell them, how do you know that the person that you're with is beautiful? Could you ever know that they're beautiful? I have my girlfriend and I think she's beautiful, right? So, and somebody else comes up, why are you with that person or whatever, you know? But the point is that it is not about the physicality of that thing, but it can also be. That's the beauty of the duality there. It can also be. But what it is this emotional connection that I have that is the beauty of what she is to me. not so much her physical beauty, even though I think she's beautiful. But the thing is that we need to focus more and broaden our horizons in order to allow our mind to be have an open door for these ideas and thoughts. And if we close ourselves off and say, hey, you know what, I was reading a book and the book says that if you don't have perfectly symmetrical features, then you are unattractive. Who says? A writer? You know, who says something that was printed? Is that the truth? Is that valid? I guess it could be, but is it correct? Maybe not. You just don't know. But how do you feel about that? I think the emotional connection is what's most important.
This is, we're already getting deep into it.
Yeah.
We're just
which
to
is the reason
second
why I'm sitting here
question.
today.
You know, because I mean, there's such interesting stuff that's bubbling up here. One of those is this relationship, which you've touched on a couple of times already, Miguel, is this relationship between our ideas or how we think and our sensual experience, you know, which is what aesthetics is. Aesthetics is our experiential.
I guess I should ask the question, what is aesthetics?
Aesthetics is our sensual interface with the world as it is.
Correct.
So it comes from the Greek aesthesis.
Right.
You know, it's how we describe our sensual, physical involvement in the world.
Correct.
This is hard, this is soft, this is a pleasant feeling, right? It makes my skin tingle or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's an aesthetic experience when you're focusing on those kinds of criteria. Beauty, I think, is a subcategory of that. So in terms of aesthetics, I can say that's something, you know, caused me to think or to make this judgment that it was beautiful, and I want to pass that on to others, right? Mm-hmm. Or avoid this because it made me feel disgusting, and you know, it made me want to retch or throw up, or this made me really want to kind of hang out with this sort of experience, right? So there's those kinds of distinctions that I think we need to keep in mind, that I think a lot of times get superficially not taken into account when we use beauty for everything. You know, these kinds of superficial plastering over of all of our experiences.
Right.
And then we don't have that which we recommend to others, or that which we, you know, think is important. So there's really interesting stuff that we're already grappling with in just trying to understand these words and terms and how we use them.
And what's interesting for me about what you just said is how, again, there is the separation, right? At least that's what we try to do as individuals. And I think that's one of the places where the general population falters, is because we have, as individuals, grown, right? We have now become these intellectual beings that are very different from cavemen back in the day. But in my opinion, from what I've seen as far as artwork and how they created artwork back in the day in comparison to how we create artwork today, because we now have this kind of connection to intellect that is more valid than our emotion and feeling, therefore we start to kind of create this bigger divide, almost like this huge valley where you're either in this side or you are on this side. And I try to bring these two worlds together. For example, we're talking about aesthetics and the concept of what aesthetics is, the science, the philosophy of what aesthetics is. And let me tell you guys a little story. When I was in grad school, I understood the concept of aesthetics, but the question was posed to me, I want you to create what is your aesthetic. I'm like, I couldn't even understand that question. Fresh into grad school, studying painting, what is my aesthetic? I don't know what my aesthetic is. I didn't really begin to understand what my aesthetic was when I was forced to teach. When I was forced to teach, then I got the opportunity to really understand why I was even an artist. Why am I even in art school? I don't know. And what was interesting was I was forced to teach art appreciation. That's when my life changed completely. And I was forced to teach, which I didn't want to. I was a rebel, I was an artist, I didn't like the whole education system, it had never done me right, so I didn't want to be part of that. And they're like, if you don't teach, you don't graduate. Oh, where's the class? Lead me to where my class is at. So I taught the class, but what was interesting is that I finally figured out why I loved what I loved, which boggles my mind. How is it that when you study art, you are never forced to take an art appreciation class? Meaning, how can you become what you become, not even fully understanding why you're becoming what you're becoming? Which is another deep philosophical question, right? But how do you do that? And it is through all of these divisions that we start to create chaos within the minds of individuals. And if we could bring those together a little bit more and allow ourselves to think that things are beautiful, then we can begin to really understand the concept behind aesthetics, as opposed to thinking, well, it's not aesthetically pleasing because I took school and my professor told me that aesthetics is this, that, and the other, and therefore I cannot think any other way. Where you miss out on all this other stuff, right? You miss out on all these levels of beauty and fully understanding and comprehending and feeling through emotions what beauty is. So for me, it is the blending of these two a little bit more than the separation of these two. Yet there are definitions for aesthetics, there is a definition for beauty, but if we can blend those together and bring them together to create a more cohesive world for people to enjoy, then I think we would be happier individuals, which then creates a much more interesting, positive, fruitful society, aesthetic society to live in. Is it going to be perfect? No, nothing's perfect. But will it lead us to something that we can get a little bit closer to perfection? I would hope so.
I want to carry this part of our dialogue on, because earlier Kim mentioned about grammar Nazis, right?
Yeah.
So where I, as I moved into the intellectual social world and started studying philosophy and religion and politics, I happened upon the phenomenon of fascism and Nazism. So I studied that. And one of the things is one of these favorite philosophers of mine, Walter Benjamin, says about art and politics is that fascism uses aesthetics to force people to agree with their worldview. Right?
The Nazis did that?
As opposed to, so this is the kind of art or aesthetics that they dictate everyone should like, as opposed to allowing people to learn how to create their own aesthetic engagement in the world, as you mentioned earlier.
Correct.
Right? So what's your aesthetic engagement? In your case, how do you had to come to understand or experience, how am I shaping my world? What's my aesthetic, sensible experience in the world? And you turn to sculpture. Like you're shaping things,
right?
The actual world you're living in, right?
Right.
So that's one way to think about sculpture, is that sculptures are this plastic art where we learn how to shape things and modeling them on what's beautiful, perhaps, or what stands out, maybe distinct from the beauty. So it's really important to in terms of art appreciation, for us to teach each other to understand those kinds of ideas. That there is a level where people dictate to us about what we should appreciate
100%.
Or surround ourselves with, right?
100%.
Yeah. Or allow people to freely find that themselves. And this is why there's all these kinds of pathways that you're bringing up in your comments. What does it mean to allow chaos to bubble up, for instance, which is what you referred to earlier?
Right.
And it's kind of like breaking the rules of what's beautiful.
Yeah, it's an avant-garde
right,
concept.
Yeah, an avant-garde concept.
Yeah, it really is.
And, and in that case, generally speaking, in society, artists are seen like rebels. They're seen as revolutionaries, and they're seen as thinking differently or creatively or out of the box, right? And so they're kind of dangerous, unless you're a fascist artist, working for the government.
Right.
I would like to be more overt here and just ask you, for our viewers, why do you think it's important for us to think about beauty? Clearly we do that here, and we're doing that here, and a lot of reasons have already come up. But more overtly, why would you say it's important for us humans to think about beauty?
Well, let me make a comment on what we're talking about and make a reference to the Germans, the Nazis, in reference to, and let me take a step back and to say that is a perfect example of how we, the general public, does not have even a clue as to the power of what art is, the power of what beauty is. The Nazis, the propaganda ministers, absolutely understood the power of what this is, and they used it to their advantage. And they used it to con literally half of the world into having this world war. So that, if that does not prove to everybody the power of what art is, I don't know what can. Secondly, beauty is something that we need to absolutely incorporate into our lives because it is more important than anybody could even fathom. Why do I say that? We don't understand the power of beauty. In the same way that the propaganda minister understood the power of what art was and how he used it to his advantage, we can use beauty to our advantage. We can use aesthetics to our advantage. We can use art to our advantage. We can use creativity to our advantage. But we're never taught that. As a matter of fact, I have a huge issue, I don't want to say problem, but I have a huge issue with STEM and STEAM. STEM, STEM is, what is STEM? Science, technology, engineering, and math. Why in the world would you exclude art? I took my daughter to San Diego State University, and it is one of the most beautiful campuses I've ever seen. Everything in there is art. And I'm not talking about it looks like art. Like there's a giant sculpture that's, 40 feet tall, made of boulders that looks like a teddy bear. It's a sculpture. One of the buildings has neon all around it with like signs flashing all this stuff. And I walk in, and I say, I'm here to bring my daughter to a viewing of your college, what are you guys about? Oh, we have a perfect STEM program. I go, STEM program? I go, literally your campus is a giant work of art, and you're excluding the art portion of this? Makes no sense to me. So, and the problem is because we've been taught to not value this thing called art.
Why?
Within art, creativity, beauty, aesthetics, all that. Because people are afraid of it. And I don't mean people like a child is afraid of it. I mean people who are individuals who make decisions don't understand it. Therefore, the first thing we want to do is keep it away from us, right? We don't want to incorporate it into everything. But if we think about it, how did we learn anything historical prior to history being documented? How do we learn anything?
Oral histories.
And? Storytelling. So
and
these are
artwork.
And artworks, right.
Through art. The storytelling is an art form. The artwork is an art form. How do we learn about science? We have artists create little molecules and atoms and things like that. So we look at art and we learn. How do we learn about math? Jane had 3 pails with a little drawing with Jane with 3 pails, and she went to a well, and how many times does she have to come back? We learn it all through art. It is literally a part of who we are every single day. Beauty is incorporated into that. Therefore, beauty is everything.
Even just our food.
Absolutely.
Even our taste buds tell us, more or less, this is safe for you to eat.
And you know why we do that?
Yeah, the larger issue here is instead of asking what is quality, which is one of our final questions there, is maybe what's culture? What is culture? Because art is just permeated through our cultural sorts of experiences, right?
We interrupted you. Do you remember what you were going to say?
Oh, I was just saying that there is so much value and importance in all of these things that we're talking about. That's why I was unbelievably excited when you said, I've been asking, when are you going to interview me? Because you said you were going to interview me like a year and a half ago.
Oh,
or 2
right
years
away
ago.
we knew we wanted to have this conversation.
I have been waiting that long to talk about this because I'm so adamant and excited about it, because I know the power of beauty and art. And I learned it when I was a kid. And how did I learn it? I learned it because when I was a child, I was mauled by a dog, and I think I died. I don't know. I can't be sure. Who knows if you die or not? But I do remember that I lifted above myself in the operating room, and I saw myself. But the first thing that I saw when I came back was a plethora of cards and little drawings that my second grade fellow students had made for me. And that was the first thing I saw. And those things that I saw brought such a wonderful feeling to me that's what kept me going. I had just gone through this traumatic experience, and that's what kept me going. So I understand the power of what this thing called art and creativity is, and beauty and aesthetics and all of that. And I can see it every day. It's the fact that most people can't see it and understand it that really limits them and stifles them. And we need to really bring this forth so individuals can start understanding these concepts a little bit more and using it to their advantage.
I think we all see it, but we're not aware.
Yeah, maybe it is aware.
Because look, like right now my leg fell asleep, so that's uncomfortable.
Correct.
And so aesthetically, right, I think that we humans are always naturally drawn towards, just like plants are naturally drawn towards the light. I think maybe most plants, I want to generalize, but
right.
If you're hot, you take off your sweater. If you're cold, you put it back on.
Right.
So we are always already, I think, humans drawn to it, but we may not be aware that this is beautiful and that's ugly, that we're not conscious of it. It's all just physiologically, hey, your leg fell asleep, that's making this experience not aesthetic anymore.
Yeah, very true.
So just shift your posture a little bit.
And then going back, I think following through with what you're saying is, and going back to the example that I gave of that STEAM, I feel like it's interesting because once you eliminate the art aspect of it, then people start to follow that, and then that becomes the status quo. Not saying that you will no longer have that feeling and connection, but when we then fully can understand this concept to the best of our ability, obviously, we can't understand everything fully, but when we begin to understand this concept a little bit better, then we begin to change, we begin to accept, we begin to make this thing then some sort of a status quo for us. And if we then in turn do that, then we can, because one of the things that we talked about earlier was, why is art important? Art is important because one of the things, and creativity and beauty and aesthetics, and I clump it all together because once we start dividing, then, I think aesthetics is right, but then everything else is wrong, or I think art is important, but who cares about beauty, But if we clump it all together, then it becomes something bigger. And once we start taking that art aspect away, we will then not understand the importance of this thing and the power behind this thing. And going back again to the propaganda ministers, they knew that if we take a swastika, for example, they knew that people will follow. And the reason why people will follow is because there was a following behind what the swastika was already, because there were individuals who were studying the swastika, and it was kind of like this thing where people understood what the swastika was.
It was an ancient mythological image.
Correct.
Right.
So then they're like, this ancient mythological image is something that is all good things, and then all of a sudden it's a Nazi image. Then they think these are all good things,
right.
And then they start following, and then it turns out, horrible things happen. But they understood the power. And because this thing, beauty, creativity, aesthetics, has this power, we should all try to learn as much as we can about it.
Yeah. I want to, and this is going off script again. You can keep
I love it.
pulling it back to script, going off script. So there's another dimension here that we're kind of skirting around, and you brought it up right in the beginning when you're talking about the difference between, feeling the beauty of something experientially or understanding it. And this has to do with our experience of beauty in nature versus our experience of an art object.
Right.
So the art object then could be a replication or a reproduction of something in nature. So you sculpt that thing, the human body, to make it look human.
Right.
Right? So it then reminds us or brings us to that experience of the beautiful human body, right? But then there's the beautiful human body that's natural and in nature, which is different than the artificial, right? So what do you think about that, Miguel, about this distinction with that artists do? Like, they have to fool us. You have to, in some way, there's an artifice in art, right?
Right, right.
And we get people to think in a certain way, which isn't always what the natural object might be.
Right.
But there's this artificial object that gets us feeling good about things. What do you think about that distinction between
flowers?
Yeah,
natural flowers versus artificial flowers? You know, the human body as beautiful naturally versus the sculpted or artistically created human body. And this, you know, gets to your passion for creativity too, right?
If I'm understanding correctly, I feel like what we're trying to kind of get at is that there's a hierarchy that exists.
Yeah.
And is there a hierarchy? I think would be the better question. Is there a hierarchy that exists? In my opinion, I don't believe that there is a hierarchy. In my opinion, I feel anyways, that if we are allowed to understand the beauty and grandeur of what nature offers, like I go out and see a sunset, it's unbelievable, right? But why do I have to limit myself if I go in and see a sculpture of something or a painting of a sunset? Can I not get the same feeling? Because there may be some people that don't have the ability to go out and see that sunset. And I'll give you a good example. The sunsets in El Paso are beautiful. My daughter's going to school in Dallas. Go over there and I can't even see a sunset because everything's flat, right? There is no contrast between the flatness of the city of Dallas, the mountainous aspect of what we have in this city. But do I minimize that because it's not the same as this? I don't think that I would be doing either one justice if I did that. So I wouldn't do that. So I can appreciate these things in the same respect. But another question I think that's interesting is, do we as artists have the ability to represent this beauty in a different way? And a good example of that is, and we were talking about bodies, right? When somebody, an ancient sculptor, Michelangelo, for example, or whoever, Donatello, are sculpting a perfect human body, they study the human body, not from the outside, they study from the inside out to understand what a ligament is, what a tendon is, how when you fold this pinky, a very specific tendon will come up, and what does a tendon look like, right? So we as sculptors, as artists, as creators, anybody as a creator, when you make your breakfast, you know, who am I to say, oh, your breakfast is unattractive, right? So I don't think that there is a difference. I think that we should, you know, clump all of this together, because then we get into what is art and what is fine art, right? Which there we can see a difference, because if I say so many things are art, they wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't be doing justice to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, right? Because my daughter painted a little drawing which was beautiful to me, but then I couldn't say my daughter's drawing is to the level of Michelangelo, who painted that when he was in his 70s, for example. But in the same respect, I don't think that there is a difference. I think that we can see something just as beautiful if it is a mimicking of that thing as the real thing, because then we start to again make these separations, which I don't believe is a good thing.
I would like to ask you about creativity, because your show, Creative Thinkers, you focus on creativity.
Absolutely.
What is creativity and why is it so important?
So for me, creativity, and I see it this way because of what I've studied, what I've learned, what I've researched, what I've lived. For me, creativity is the stimulation of something within your mind to create. And one of the things that for me is most important is literally the word create, to make something from nothing, right? And we all do that, and I think it's very unfortunate that we don't believe that we can. One of the questions that I ask my students is, how many here had their mother dress them this morning? Well, of course, nobody's going to admit it, even if that were the case. But they're like, nope, not me. Well, then you were creative. You thought about the color of your shoes. You thought about whether you want the design on there or not. Do you want black shoes? Do you want white shoes? Do you want to put on a striped shirt as opposed to a checkered shirt? That in itself is creativity. And for me, creativity is what has brought us from who we were 10, 50,000 years ago to who we are today. So we need to continue to build this thing called creativity up in order for us to keep moving forward. And one of the quotes that I think is most impressive is one by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he states that for every person that is alive and has lived in the past, there are trillions of individuals who did not exist. So we as human beings need to allow ourselves to keep moving forward and do our best to do that every day. Because if we don't, then we're doing a great injustice to all the people who have not gotten the opportunity to be who we are as human beings.
It dovetails nicely with your role as an educator teaching art appreciation.
Right.
You know, you want to pass on this kind of appreciation of what art can do for us as human beings.
Right.
And one of those is, you mentioned this just in your response right there, is this ability of art and artists to help us understand the way we individualize ourselves. Because when you say to your student, what choice did you make in dressing yourself today?
Right.
You know, what individual choice did you make to dress? What did you choose? Why did you choose it? How did you want to present yourself to the world?
Correct.
Right? And what image, what appearance did you want to make? Right? Because it's all aesthetic.
Right.
Right?
And it goes back to the same thing, right?
Right. It's how am I going to engage in the world? But I think that's super important because, you know, to come back to my reference to fascism and Nazism, one of the signs of Nazism is to rob us of that individualizing gift. You know,
but that's impossible. To me, I think that creativity is like breathing, even just speaking, right? And I think I'm going to get out there, even more out there than I normally
get philosophical
am.
on
Yes. But I think that as long as a person is alive, we cannot help but to create. Again, just as long as we're alive, we cannot help but to be drawn to that which is aesthetic. Similarly, we are creating because we're making choices, and so some of those choices are unconscious. Nevertheless, we're still producing something. There is an outcome of us just being here. And so because we're here, we cannot help but to create this conversation, to create an experience. Obviously, so it's, I think, one of the elements. If there is a God, then this is what, for me, the element that is the closest to being godlike, because
if we believe in God, if there is a God, then we must understand, or at least from what we know, that there was a creation. Even if we don't believe that there is a God, then we still must believe in this thing called creation because it came from somewhere.
Well,
all
here
of this
we
came
are.
from somewhere, and here we are. Exactly. But kind of going back to what you were saying about the Nazis, and then going back also making reference to what you said, I don't believe that. I think to a certain degree you are both right. There are individuals who try to stifle our creativity, but I think that it is inherent in us. Therefore, it cannot. Can it for a while? Sure. How long was the war, right? How long is every war? And what is the very first thing that we try to get rid of? Generally, it's artifacts, art, creativity, professors, you know,
Thinking
educated
outside the box.
individuals, people who,
question.
that's exactly right, because they understand that those are the individuals that will help the people start to make the changes, right? And it's interesting because if we think about it, we were born creative, right? As I said, inherently that's who we are. We are creations, we were born creative, we continue to be creative every single day, whether we think about it or not. The issue comes in if we are taught, I don't want to say forced, taught to not see the importance of this thing, creativity, then we don't continue to exercise in that, therefore it becomes weak. And through media, through education, through educators, through whatever,
I agree.
you know, things like this can happen.
We question ourselves. We second guess our ability to be creative, and sometimes we may even think I'm not creative when, in fact, you are creative.
About 95% people think they are not creative.
Yeah, well, you are creating this experience, this belief about yourself that you're not creative. And you are creating that by, you know?
And it's because I think that through education, we learn that we are not creative because who is creative?
The artist.
Artists are creative. I'm not an artist. Every time, every semester. Who here is creative? 80, 90, 95% of students. I'm not creative. Why are you not creative? Well, I don't know how to draw. Who said drawing is the only route to creativity? Who told you that? Who limited you that way? Why did they limit you that way? It's beyond me why that happens. But anyways, the point is that if we continue exercising that, if we continue pushing that, then who knows where we would be. If we didn't, in fact, ever be creative, where would we be today? We'd still be in the cave.
Right.
It is because
it's problem solving.
Yeah,
part of it is.
It is because we are creative that we are sitting here right now with cameras, with lights, with a studio, with all of our producers and camera people here helping us out. That is why we're here. And if we begin to give value to this stuff, then we will begin to use it more. And maybe we can come up with a cure for cancer.
I don't think that it's just problem solving, though. I think that
part
creativity,
of it is.
I don't think it's just problem solving,
That's
though.
Right.
I think creativity is adventurous and exploratory as well.
Sure.
And, I mean, you don't get to come back to the chaos comment. There's a certain amount of deconstruction that has to go on before creativity can happen, because we are regimented in many ways. And the underlying issue here, the underlying philosophical issue here is, do we want to cultivate and educate people to think freely, or to kind of accept their coercions, right?
Correct.
We're all coerced into acting in certain ways, having to follow the certain
status quo
rules and the status quo, right? And so that does dampen or dissuade people from thinking they're creative, or they have the freedom to express themselves, right? In this way that's different than somebody else. It leads to all kinds of things like homophobia and all.
And the beauty in that statement, sorry for interrupting, but the beauty in that statement is the fact that, as far as my belief is concerned, we all have free will.
Yeah.
And through that free will, we're able to create, look at beauty, have a better understanding of things. But if we are limited, then, and even if they take only 1% of that away, it's a grave injustice.
I think this is a wonderful dialogue, by the way, Miguel, and I'm thinking of changing our list of questions because.
The next question.
Well, I would just want to say, okay, go ahead, because my question is.
Go ahead.
Well,
we can both ask.
How does one become an artist? How do you get to become an artist? How do you know I'm an artist, or that I'm doing something creative, right? Other than as opposed to just doing something according to the status quo,
following
or reproducing something, or following the recipe, right? In what way does an artist break out and become an artist? One thing you mentioned before about is this kind of educational trajectory from cave people until today is that we've progressed and learned something, and we learn different perspectives and different depth and about color and all that kind of stuff, and form, right? But an artist has to have what Kim was, I think, referring to, some kind of gumption or confidence to say, no, I'm going to do it this way, or I'm going to look at it this way, in this kind of new creative way, as opposed to the standard.
One of the things that is of most importance is that we understand what an artist is, right?
Yeah.
An artist is basically a creator. But then we also have to understand that if an artist is a creator and we are all creators, then what are we all? We are all artists, right? We're all creating something. The issue that I guess created that separation was the fact that at some point we weren't just all creators. Like back in the caveman days, hey, bring me the painter. Hey, bring me the architect. Bring me the sculptor. No. Who's that guy that does that stuff, or that girl that does that stuff? They were creators, right? So now, because we have these subcategories, we separate things. And because we have all of this separation, I believe that it creates problems. Does it help organize things? Sure it does. But because we start to organize so deeply, then everything else falls by the wayside, which I think is very unfortunate, right? It's like, is my child a creative child because they make a drawing? And because they're creative, are they making art? Yeah, 100% they're making art. Did the caveman back in the day that made the little tiny carving of the bull, was he making art? He was making something. Today we see and view that thing in an art museum. So we categorize it as art only because we are sophisticated individuals who are categorizing these things. But all of us are creators, all of us are artists. I think the only difference is that we have a better understanding of how to fulfill these things that we are all given. We have a way for us to understand and organize these things in a different way. We have a better understanding of how to take the fluidity of ideas and bring them to fruition through something, as opposed to I walk down the street and I'm a layman, not an artist, and I see a leaf or something laying on the ground, and I pass by and say, oh, look, there's something laying on the ground, a leaf. And an artist will pass by and say, wow, a leaf laying on the ground. How did it get here? Begins to ask questions. Where did the tree come from? What did we have to go through to get this type of tree? Why is the leaf orange instead of green? Yeah. Then we will in turn force ourselves, well, maybe I don't want to say force ourselves, allow ourselves to create something based on that. And for most people, that is the end of the story. It's like, oh, look, and then it ends. How much more beautiful would it be, speaking of beauty, how much more beautiful would it be if we all had that mindset? If we all could walk by a fallen leaf and appreciate its beauty, appreciate the context behind it, appreciate the content that we are visually looking at and how it makes us feel, and understand the feeling that we have and what I can then in turn do or produce through that feeling. And that, I think, is one of the greatest injustices, that we, through society and education and all of this, does not allow us to do that. Because we all have that.
We have time for one last question, very fast and furious. I think that being here on the border, our philosophic dialogues from La Frontera lends itself to be more philosophical and more creative, precisely because we're at the margin of two different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing the similarities, the contrasts, allows us to question and have a different perspective as opposed to if we were in the smack middle of it. And being homogeneous, right, where everybody thinks the same, dresses the same, more or less, speaks the same. Here you have these two cultures. So what do you think about, and just briefly, maybe this is the topic for the next show that we'll have to bring you on. What do you think about being on the border and creativity?
Well, one of the things that I think is most important is the fact that we're always influenced by something, right? And here we have the opportunity to be influenced by two completely different cultures. And just the fact that we are able to have that influence from different sides. For example, I'm Mexican, American, Hispanic, whatever we want to call it. Because of that, I have the opportunity to really understand the concept, or to the best of my ability, understand the concept of what it is to be an American, right? But culturally speaking, I am Mexican, right? And because of that, I also have the ability to have that understanding. My girlfriend happens to be an Anglo, and she's very, very much thinks the way that somebody coming from, I don't know, Minnesota or something may think, which is very different from what we think, right? So we always have very interesting conversations because it's like, oh, well, this is my perspective. Oh, this is how I live. This is what I see. This is how I grew up. These are the things that I did on a day-to-day basis. And she's like, wow, like I never had even a clue as to what that is. So I believe that there is a lot of opportunity for us to have a lot of creativity here, but I don't think that we have opened up that jar yet. It is starting because, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, there was a law that was passed that forced us to allow 1% of everything that we made here in the city to incorporate art. So if we're making a building, it has to have a mural. If we're making a bridge, it has to have a painting, whatever. So we're absolutely in this renaissance, if I can use that word, this rebirth of this like great period in El Paso. And we really have to like grab the bull by the horns and go with it, because we're such a fruitful place, but because for such a long time we were not given that opportunity, we have been stagnant. And we really need to push that, because we have one thing that nobody else has, is the ideas and concepts coming from two completely different places. So I think we're in like the perfect spot.
I agree.
The perfect spot.
Miguel, a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine.
Thank you so much.
You guys have no idea. Super excited.
So
Thank you.
This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. Kim Diaz.
Jules Simon.
And our guest, Miguel Valenzuela. Please join us next time.